So one can wash the bowl, then one takes the piece of soap, and because there'll be oil and some grease on the hands, so then one will rub the piece of soap in the hand and then go back into the water of the bowl and rub it again. Okay, so now when the Buddha finishes washing his bowl, then he puts the bowl on the floor, neither too far away from him nor too close to him. And it said he is neither careless of the bowl. Of course, the bowl, in those days, they could have been made often out of clay or metal, iron. So if one is careless, if it's a clay bowl, the bowl can break. If it's iron, if you're careless, it could get knocked on the floor and then it gets a dent in it. Nor is he over-solicitous about it so that he shows that there's a kind of attachment to the bowl. Okay, then when the Buddha finishes eating, he sits in silence for a while. I guess if it's what they call a Sangika dana, that's a dana offered to the Buddha together with a number of monks. The Buddha will wait until the other monks have finished their meal. And even after then, he'll wait a few minutes till people finish putting away the dishes, cleaning up a little, getting things tidy in the kitchen. They'll do the big cleanup after all the function is over. But just wait till everybody finishes, putting away their things. Then people will put mats down on the floor in front of the Buddha and sort of waiting till all the commotion of people coming in and saying, you sit here, you sit there. When all of that is over and everybody will be sitting sort of silently, waiting for the discourse to begin, then the Buddha gives, it's translated here as the blessing. It's called anumodana. But it's not just a blessing like, may you be happy, have long life, may you enjoy good health. Not just a blessing like that, but the Buddha will give a little discourse, not going into like really deep, mind-boggling teachings or really exact teachings on meditation, but just, it's called anumodana because it means literally rejoicing with the good deeds of the people who have offered the meal. So the Buddha will explain, for example, the merits of giving, how observing giving is beneficial both to the giver and the recipients. And then he'll speak about other issues relating to how to live a virtuous life within the household. Then he'll speak about the merits of giving. And then probably at the end he'll recite some verses expressing the appreciation, his own appreciation, the appreciation of the Sangha. And in those verses there might be lines like, the good man who gives to the virtuous ascetics with a pure heart, intent on cultivation, such a one acquires much merit that leads to happiness in many future lives. Well, we recite, the typical verse recited today is Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba buddhanubhavena sabba dhammanubhavena sabba sanganubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang, may there be all good fortune. May the deities protect you by the spiritual power of the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. Sabba buddhanubhavena sada soti, may you always be safe. Okay, so now when the Buddha is giving the blessing, he doesn't criticize the meal and say, very poor people might be giving. He doesn't say, why are you giving just maybe rice and dal? Why aren't you giving a lot of other fancy dishes? But he's always appreciative, whatever he accepts, and he doesn't do so praising the meal. If it's wealthy people giving a lot of sumptuous food. He doesn't say, oh, you gave such wonderful, delicious food. Please, when you invite us again, make sure you give this dish or that dish. But it says he instructs, urges, rouses, and gladdens the audience with a talk purely on the Dhamma. Okay, so then after giving the Anumodana, the blessing talk, then he rises and he departs. Nowadays, at the end of the Anumodana, people will, usually they make offerings of other necessities for the Sangha. Typical in Sri Lanka, we get like a package with, usually have a towel, a bar of soap, toothpaste, toothbrush, sometimes a package of tea, package of milk powder, package of sugar. Other things that on special occasions it might have an umbrella, or usually there'll be an offering to the eldest monk. They'll get they call it Atta Pirikara, the 8 requisites, the 3 robes, the belt, the filter for filtering water, the razor blade, or it's actually one of those straight razors, a barber's razor, a sewing needle. Okay, so now when the Buddha is walking, again, not too slow, not too fast, not like he wants to get away. That's my own fault. Okay, then it describes how he wears his robe, how he goes back to the monastery. Again, this repeats some of the earlier things. When he sits down in the monastery, he establishes mindfulness in front of him. This is interesting, the last one in this paragraph. He sits with his mind set on his own welfare, on the welfare of others, on the welfare of both, even on the welfare of the whole world. Okay, now the next paragraph describes how the Buddha teaches the Dharma. This is at the monastery. It could be like in the evening, early evening, when many people are coming to the monastery to hear the Buddha give a discourse. And so now he's actually doing formal teaching. It's not like just the blessing discourse, the blessing talk after the meal. Okay, so it said that he doesn't flatter the audience, and he doesn't berate them or criticize them. It's not like this, they call them fire and brimstone type of preachers. You are all sinners, you're all going to hell. When you fall into hell, the devils are going to grab you and burn you. Not like that. But he just speaks purely on the Dhamma to instruct, urge, inspire, encourage, and gladden the audience with a talk on the Dhamma. And then there are supposed to be 8 qualities of the speech of the Buddha that are described here. His speech is always distinct, intelligible, melodious. It said he has a melodious voice, audible. It has a ringing tone to it. It's euphonious, I guess a kind of resonant. That seems very similar to melodious. I don't know the distinction, actually. It's deep, a deep voice, and sonorous. And then it said that his voice extends as far as the audience, but it doesn't go out beyond the audience. That's what it says. And I've always wondered, as a practical matter, even when we have like a relatively small class here, for my voice to be heard in the back row, I have to use this electric microphone. In the days when they didn't have electricity, I imagine the Buddha would be speaking to groups of, several hundred people over a large area. I don't know how his voice extended that far. And even if we say that the Buddha might have had the spiritual power to project his voice, but say when ordinary monks were giving discourses, it could be several hundred people come, maybe even 1,000 people. In fact, in some of the descriptions of the famous discourses, it says that 1,000 people came. I wonder if any old Sri Lankan monks are alive from before the days when electricity was introduced into the monasteries. I could ask them about that. Yeah.
And I noticed people have called him a bodhisattva.
Yeah.
So would not his voice have carried across? I mean, if first of all, let me say I'm feeling a lot of aversion to this sutta.
A lot of what?
If he's a bodhisattva in our living day, and this is a capacity of a mere arahant, then would not Venerable Ananda Maitreya's voice have carried forever? And does this not point to the non-literal nature of this sutta?
You mean because his voice is preserved in the form of recordings?
I'm wondering, did he ever speak to 1,000 people, and could they hear him? Did Venerable Ananda Maitreya speak to very large audiences without amplification, electrical amplification? So that should have been my first question.
I think when I saw him speak in public halls, he had the amplifier.
Did anyone ever have difficulty hearing him? And perhaps that's their own karma.
This I don't know because I didn't go through and ask everybody. But with electric amplification, the sound would have carried pretty, throughout the hall. I don't know, it's something. And the fact that somebody is having a bodhisattva aspiration doesn't mean that his voice is going to be amplified over long distances. I mean, the Dalai Lama is regarded as, a very advanced bodhisattva, but when he gives talks in public, it's with amplification. Yeah.
I'm guessing with proper architectural design, the voice will magnify. That help a lot.
Maybe so, yeah. But I would imagine that in the Buddha's time in India, they would give the talks outdoors. They would set up a kind of a platform, and probably the Buddha would go up on the platform to talk, but there would not be walls. Maybe sometimes there would be walls. If there's a preaching hall, a lecture hall, then he would preach, but talk inside the lecture hall. But often, when it's pleasant weather outside on a full moon night. Anyway, this is a mystery that I haven't been able to solve yet. Okay, so his voice has all of those qualities. Okay, and then when the Buddha's finished his discourse and people rise from their seat and depart, looking only at him and concerned with nothing else. And there was another quality of the Buddha's discourse that I had read about someplace, and this is that when the Buddha is speaking even to a large audience, everybody in the audience somehow thinks that the Buddha is speaking directly to him, answering exactly that person's questions, dealing with that person's problems. But the Buddha is speaking, with everybody in mind. So it seems maybe the Buddha uses his ability to read the minds of others in order to touch on different problems of different people in the audience. Okay, so now the young Brahmin student is sort of summing up his report to his master. He says, "We have seen Master Gautama walking, sir. We have seen him standing. We have seen him entering into the house. We have seen him sitting in silence inside the house. We have seen him eating indoors. We have seen him sitting in silence after the meal. We have seen him giving the blessing or the short talk after the meal. We have seen him going back to the monastery. We have seen him sitting in the monastery. We have seen him teaching the Dhamma to an audience in the monastery. And so that is, he's saying, that's what I've observed of Master Gotama. Okay, so when this was said, then the Brahman, Brahmayu, he must have been listening to this report, with very excited, maybe with his hair even standing on end, because the Brahmins, according to this discourse, they had the record of somebody who's going to become a Buddha, but they had never found anybody who measured up to that standard before. And now from this description of the Buddha as one who has the 32 marks and who behaves in such careful, mindful, dignified, self-possessed way, he realizes that somebody has appeared who's fulfilled all of the qualities, all the manifest qualities of a fully enlightened one. So then the Brahmin rearranges his robes in a respectful way, and then he extends his hands in the Anjali, that's the joined hands, in salutation towards the Buddha, and he exclaims 3 times, it's Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. So he recites that 3 times, and then he says, perhaps, or I think it's better to translate, I hope sometime or other I might meet this Master Gotama and have the opportunity for some conversation with him. Okay, maybe at this point I'll stop and then ask whether we have any questions, anything based on what I've covered so far, the 32 marks or the behavior of the Buddha. Okay, there's a mobile microphone. Let's pass that.
Thank you. I have 2 little questions and I guess a bigger question.
Okay. We'll take the little ones
2
first.
little questions. I was reading this and I realized, the Buddha had hair as opposed to Buddhist monks today. So I was wondering how, I guess in the Vinaya it's specified you don't have hair as a monk. So
Yeah.
How did that work? And also, I've noticed always in the Buddha statues that the Buddha has very large ears and earlobes, but that doesn't seem to be one of the 32 marks.
Yeah.
So where did that come from?
Okay, so let's take those 2 questions. Okay, about the hair, it's the tradition within the Buddhist monasticism and also within even the pre-Buddhist ascetic traditions of India, or at least many of them, that when one leaves the household life, one shaves the hair and the beard, and then one goes forth. And then there's a Vinaya rule that one is supposed to shave the head within, I think it's 2 months or 2 fingers of growth, whichever comes first. So 2 fingers of growth, I think it's like 2 joints of the fingers. But it's traditional, very seldom do we see monks who wait that long to shave their head, because then one starts to lose the distinctive appearance of a monk. It becomes almost like, it starts to look almost like an ordinary person with somewhat shorter hair than normal. A little bit like, maybe like Barbara, or yeah, a little bit like Barbara's hair. So usually in Sri Lanka, say monks will shave the head